I want to bring in live now the federal Liberal MP for Menzies, Keith Wolahan. Keith, you've been listening on. First reaction to Brad Batten, the new Victorian Liberal leader.
The first reaction, Brad very generously acknowledged the service of John Pesutto, and that's quite right and proper. But being opposition leader is one of the toughest jobs in politics, but being the opposition leader in Victoria is the toughest. And, you know, I know Michael O'Brien very well, I know Matthew Guy very well. I've seen the toll that it takes on not just them, but their families as well. So John Pesutto is a fighter, and he's fought all the way to the end of his leadership. And, you know, people will pass judgment on the particular decisions made about the more redeeming issue. But every day, John Pesutto got up, putting the interests of Victorians first. And even when we saw him interviewed then, that's what he was doing. That's the measure of his character. And it was very good of Brad to acknowledge that.
Do you think there should still be a place for John Pesutto in terms of the shadow ministry within the Brad Batten team now, or is that a relationship that won't be able to be repaired?
Well, the timing of me being on your show, Trudy, we didn't know this was going to be happening. I think it would be very fraught for a federal MP to be giving advice to state colleagues that they wouldn't do it in reverse. So I respect their sovereignty and autonomy, and I'm watching as a Victorian citizen. But that's the point. I'm a Victorian citizen as well as Victorian federal member of Parliament, and Victorians are hurting. I spent many time speaking to parents at school graduations recently, and I just casually asked people, what are you doing this summer? You know what most said? They said, oh, I think this year we'll stay at home. And behind that was the reality of the cost of living crisis that Victorians are facing. They're making decisions that mean they have to try and pay the mortgage, pay the bills, put food on the table in a way that we haven't seen in this state since the early 90s. Victoria has higher government debt than all of the East Coast states combined. Our household disposable income is 10% lower than the national average. Building infrastructure costs 30% more. We're struggling. And as Brad Batten quite rightly pointed out, roads are crumbling and crime is up. In my area, aggravated burglaries have doubled. So this is the time now to focus on the needs of Victorians, because they're hurting and they really need the Liberal Party to come together for them.
Keith, do you think in hindsight that John Pesutto would have been wiser to have settled this issue with Moira Deeming more than a year ago, that it should never have got to the federal court, that it should have been an apology and this could have been wrapped up and well behind the Victorian Liberals? Has the decision to let this bleed on, as you say, overshadowed the Victorian Liberals' ability to sell those messages that you've just been talking about?
I'll let John Pesutto reflect on the answer to that question. Only he was privy to all of the legal advice and all of the other offers of compromise, which are always confidential. That is an important part of litigation. I've been a barrister for over a decade. So only the parties to litigation know the terms that were offered. So I think a lot of people speculate about these things, but that is for John to reflect on, and his opinion is the only one that counts.
And what about the federal implications here? We're on the eve of a federal election. It looks like the Liberals are back within a competitive position against Labor in that state where you are. You've got a very, very marginal seat. I think the redistribution actually means it's notionally Labor, the seat of Menzies now. What federal implications are there from that mess that we have seen embroiling the state branch for months, if not years?
We don't take anything for granted, and I certainly don't in my seat. But when I look across Melbourne, the field of federal candidates that we've put forward, we've put our best foot forward. There's some amazing candidates. And so I think at this election, the federal Liberals have got a lot to offer Victorians who, as I said, are really hurting. And they're hurting on a federal level as well. So we will seek to earn the trust of Victorians. And on the one hand, we will point out that, yes, times are tough, and yes, are you better off than you were in May 2022? And I think we know the answer to that. But we'll also offer the other side to that question, which is, here is our alternative to take us back on track, to get Australia and Victoria moving again. And I think we've got a very competitive offer to put to the Victorian people.
It strikes me as a fascinating like for like. The Peter Dutton, a former police officer, as the federal opposition leader. Now Brad Batten, also a former cop, taking on that Victorian role. How big, in terms of the federal election campaign for the Liberals, do you think will be about some of those crime and law and order issues?
Well, we don't pretend that crime is overwhelmingly a federal issue. It's overwhelmingly a state issue, but there are some overlaps. And there is a link between the state of crime and the economy. There always has been. That correlation is there. So when you improve the economy, you reduce the incentives for crime. And again, if you come to Melbourne, if you were to go to the airport and come to the city and come out to my electorate on the Eastern Freeway, what you would see, Trudy, is graffiti everywhere, rubbish everywhere. And so people look around and they say, is this a city that is caring for itself? And if we don't care for it, why should others care for it? So Victoria and Melbourne needs to be improved again. It needs to be the old Victoria, the old Melbourne, that we not only love, but that migrants move across oceans to get here for. So that's the Melbourne I love, and that's the Melbourne that needs to be at its best again, because it's not at the moment.
Well, Keith Wolahan, Liberal MP for Menzies, appreciate you being there just as we saw that breaking news. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.